Hello friends, this is Santhanam from Officers IAS Academy, and in this video we will continue our discussion on modern Indian history. So in the last video, if you remember, we spoke about the second modern Indian history class where I specifically focused on the various conquests undertaken by the British against Indian rulers and the different administrative policies taken by the by the British to overthrow the Indian rulers and get their positions in India. So practically we looked at all the ways in which consolidation of the British Empire in India happened. That's what we saw in the last class. So in today's class, I would like to specifically talk about the way in which the British ruled India in terms of administration. So last class, consolidation. Now what are they doing with regards to administration in that consolidated territory? That's the story of today's class. Today's class is quite important because of multiple reasons. Some of the most important aspects of modern Indian history, some of the most important implications of the colonial rule in India will be discussed in this class. So if you pay close attention to this class, you will be able to answer a lot of questions which have come in the UPSC earlier in all these years. So without any further ado, we'll start today's class. So today's class, the theme would be the British policies in India in general. Now when I say British policies, I am talking about administrative policies, educational policies, cultural, socio-cultural policies, policy with regards to industries, agricultural policy, land revenue policy. So in these ways, what are all the various policies followed by the British in India, we will see in this class. But for us to actually understand the policy of the British in India, we have to first understand what is the objective of the British government in India. So we know the objective of East India Company, that we know, profit is the objective. What about the administration run by the East India Company after the Battle of Buxar? That we will try to understand. So after the Battle of Buxar, they had this system called as dual government setup, correct? I told you in the last class. Because of the dual government setup, the British were holding on to some amount of administration. The Indian Nawab, the Bengali Nawab, he was holding the other aspect of Bengali administration. Now while the British were holding their own position in administration and power in administration, what was their objective is the question. See, their objective is actually just threefold. 1. Increase company's profits. 2. Enhance profitability of all the positions. And 3. Strengthening of British hold over India. As simple as that. So as you can see, this is what happens when a private enterprise is given the job of taking care of administration. Because a private enterprise has the only objective of making money. And if that is the case, obviously their objective is going to stay like this only. Making profit, enhancing profit and strengthening the hold so that they can make more profit. So this is the objective. It is based on this objective only they actually installed this dual government setup, which we have seen earlier. This dual government setup was designed in such a way that the British will be making all the money and the Indians will have all the responsibility. So this is how it was designed. The British didn't want any responsibility at all because India is a country which they don't really understand still. When they don't understand the country so much, they don't want to administer this country as well. But they still want the money. Therefore, I will have the Diwani and Nizamat rights while you, the Nawab, will have every other right. So this is how the British were holding on to the administration in Bengal and making profits for themselves through this dual government setup. This dual government setup was a huge failure. It was a huge failure because the British practically did not care about administration. The Nawab, even if he wanted to, could not care about administration. At the end of the day, who were the losers? The people of Bengal were the losers. And therefore, this became a huge problem in Bengal because in the late 1760s, there was a huge Bengal famine. Bengal famine was not caused by the British, but because of the dual government setup instituted by the British, this Bengal famine, its impact became worse. Had there been some responsible government present there, they would have taken a lot of precaution to mitigate the impact of the famine, but that didn't happen. The Bengal people were suffering because of this dual government setup, and many people died because of this famine, and the government did not do anything with regards to that. So as you can see, this experiment of dual government was a huge failure. It was a huge failure for the East India Company, and the East India Company was still not willing to let go of all the power that it is holding, in spite of all these scandals that is happening here. So here you have to understand how things work. East India Company is doing all of this in India, but because of the failure that is happening in India, it is facing a lot of heat back in Britain. In Britain, all these happenings in India is causing a lot of embarrassment for the East India Company. We always think about East India Company, the British coming over to India, the British insulting Indians, the British ruling over Indians, and all of this we say. But we hardly talk about what the British government did to East India Company. What was the relationship between the British government and the East India Company, which is a private company, private British company. So this relationship we don't really talk. So that also we will talk now. So now we will specifically deal with that relationship which I just mentioned, that is the relationship with the homeland. What did East India Company do is the question. So here you look at the way how East India Company is behaving with the homeland. East India Company is making a lot of money. It's making a lot of money because of the profitable trade that it has been enjoying in India for several years now, several decades now, in fact for more than a century now. And everybody in Britain who is holding the shares of East India Company, they're also happy with the amount of profits that they are receiving. But you should know, with more and more and more money that they are making, the East India Company officials are getting more and more greedy. That is the reality here. They are getting very greedy, and you should know that the East India Company's greed didn't go unnoticed. It did not really go unnoticed. The government of Britain, the British government, was looking at what the East India Company is doing, and it was not happy because East India Company is making so much amount of money, and with all that money it is only enriching itself. The British government is asking for some of that money to be spent on British industries to be built, to be spent on British public sector undertakings. But the East India Company is refusing to share. Why? Because the officers of East India Company, they have all the money, they don't want to give it up. Obviously, they wouldn't want to give it up. So the British government was not happy with East India Company. On top of which, when the fiasco of dual government happened, the British government decided that we have to put an end to this. We have to ask a question with regards to what they are going to do here. The British government raised a set of questions, a series of questions. The British government initially asked, what is the relationship between East India Company, its possessions, and the British government? They are asking the East India Company. So this question means East India Company is holding India, but East Indian Company is a British company. So I, as the British government, does it mean that I hold the Indian possessions? Because you are actually serving my country only. I am the government of Britain. And because you are registered in Britain as East India Company, British East India Company, does all your possessions in India belong to me? That is a question that they are indirectly asking. Second question, how were the company's authorities in Britain to control the numerous officials stationed in India? There was a complaint here that all the British East India officials in India are being very corrupt, and the ones in Britain are unable to control that corruption. So how is it that the East India Company will be able to control all the authorities present in India? Is there any scheme that the East India Company is trying to do? Is there any measures that the company is trying to take? That's the question. Third question. The East India Company is present in India, it is present in Madras, it is present in Calcutta, it is present in Bombay, but these three are in three different corners of the same country, and it is very, very far away. India is a huge country, unlike that of Britain. The homeland is very, very small. So in such places in India, which is scattered all across the country, is there a possibility for the East India Company to have a single central government in India, with which all the Indian governance can be done from that Indian center itself? So this question they are asking. So three questions. One, does the positions held by the East India Company in India belong to me as well? Number two, how are the British East India Company officials in Britain going to control the authorities of East India Company in India? And three, whether is it possible to have one central point of administration to control all the Indian affairs from India itself? So these questions they are asking. So indirectly the British government is asking for reforms. That is the takeaway here. Now here I have to talk about, I already talked about the company's officials making lots of profits, but you should also know that the company, when they made a lot of profits, of course all the shareholders of the company were very happy. While they were very happy, you should know there were a lot of people who were not at all happy. Many people who are very, very jealous. Now who are these people who were jealous? Those people, those traders and merchants who could not go to India and do trade with India. There are many traders and merchants in Britain who could not go to Britain. Why? So who could not go to India. Why? Because East India Company has the monopoly to do trade with India. It means no other British trading company can trade with India and make the same kind of profits that these company officials are making. And therefore all these merchants are very jealous, and they kept on trying everything that is possible to destroy this monopoly. Once this monopoly is destroyed, it isn't a problem. It is not a problem where they will be able to do trade with India, and they were taking every measure to actually destroy this monopoly. They kept on talking about this to the people. They used to write articles after articles in the newspapers, and slowly the public opinion about East India Company changed in Britain. In Britain, people started to think that this East India Company is not probably all that good, all that saintly. It is probably an evil force. On top of this, when the people's opinion changed about East India Company, many British parliamentarians themselves, they thought that maybe we should also go and attack this East India Company, only then people will vote for us. So this is how the British politicians' mentality also changed. So they also started to say that East India Company is getting too powerful. It is able to, if it wants to, it can actually purchase the entire parliament. That's how much money they have. So this is a threat to democracy, it is a threat to civil liberties of the British people, and therefore East India Company has to be put in check. It is under this only, under these circumstances only, East India Company was put under a lot of stress. It was put under a lot of stress. But one would think that East India Company is having a lot of problems, and therefore it would really have to agree to whatever the British parliamentarians say, one would think. But actually no, East India Company didn't care at all. It is making all these, it is having all these scandals. It does have a lot of embarrassing moments and everything, but still the East India Company did not care one bit, because the King of England was a major shareholder in East India Company, and the East India Company was very happy. The king itself is on my side only, and therefore I don't really have to worry about anything, says this company officials. But still East India Company realized one thing: they may be invincible on paper, they may be invincible. Yes, they may be able to get away with all these things. However, they realize that the public perception and opinion about East India Company has changed so drastically that they have to accept some compromises, especially after the fiasco of dual system of government. After dual government, the company realized that we have made a huge blunder and we have to go ahead and accept these things, accept whatever the government says. We have to accept to some amount of reforms within ourselves. See, we see a lot of scandals in India also. There are many companies which are not doing proper governance. There is some corporate misgovernance is going on, because of which the government takes over those companies and all these things happen in India also. And once they take over, they will introduce a lot of reforms. For example, BCCI was reformed. This Yes Bank is about to be reformed. IL and FS, that is reformed. So in that way, all these companies are going to be reformed one after the other. So similarly, East India Company is also proposed to be reformed. And you should know, there are many people present in East India Company who are telling that if we don't accept to these reforms, we will become the villain, and once everybody is convinced that we are the villains, then it will be easy for us to, it will be easy for them to actually take us down. So in this way, it was facing a lot of trouble. Finally, there was the word of many enlightened individuals like that of Adam Smith, who was steadfast against any form of monopoly. Because Adam Smith is a person who talks about free market and free economy, where everybody should have equal access to do their businesses. So it is based on this enterprising nature only economies should run, says Adam Smith. But of course, the East India Company is contradicting that, because East India Company says that I have monopoly over trade with India. So therefore, all these intellectuals are also against the East India Company. Now that all of them are against East India Company, question arises, what to actually do? Should we accept any reforms? And eventually all the company board officials, they decided that maybe we have to. Maybe we have to accept some reforms. And that reform started with the Regulating Act of 1773. So you might have read about Regulating Act of 1773 in polity, but this is how this Regulating Act of 1773 came into play, because of the pressure that was faced by the East India Company. In this Regulating Act of 1773, new reforms are now brought. What kind of reforms? First, it brought about the British government's direct involvement in Indian affairs. From now on, British government, which is outside the purview of East India Company, can now indulge and interfere in Indian affairs of the East India Company. That is now legalized. Then it recognized that the company's role in India extended beyond mere trade to administrative and political fields. So this East India Company was doing only trade, and now they say that is not the case. The company can do other things as well, not just trade, other things as well can be done, says the Regulating Act of 1773. The Act also brings about something called as the, it brings about this new procedure where the court of directors of the company, East India Company's directors, were required to submit all correspondence regarding revenue affairs, civil and military administration to the government for the perusal of the British parliamentarians, so that they can know what these guys are doing and in which way they are being very corrupt. So they will be able to identify that. And also, while doing all of this, the one major reform which was expected by many people was not present. That reform was abolition of monopoly. This monopoly was not abolished at all. So in spite of reforming in other areas, the monopoly was abolished. Sorry, not abolished. Then they also told that there will be a Governor General. So for the first time, the term Governor General is brought into place. He is not called as Governor General of India. He is called as Governor General, that's all. Governor General of Bengal actually. So this Bengal, this Calcutta is the place from where the British administration is going to take place. So here is where the Governor General is, and this Governor General will be superior to the Governor of Bengal, Governor of Madras and Governor of Bombay. So this is how it is mentioned. And apart from this, it also told that we will establish a Supreme Court at Calcutta, and we are prohibiting private trade by company officials. Private trade is not accepted. So what does private trade mean is the question. See, private trade, it means that company officials should be working for the trade and commercial activities of the East India Company. But what did they do? They were working for the trading and commercial activities of East India Company. Along with that, they also had their own personal trade, their own personal trading company, with which they were present in India doing trade for both, and most persistently they will be trading only with their company. They will forget about how to enhance the trade of East India Company. So in that way, East India Company was starting to lose its profit, while the company officials are able to gain a lot of profit because of private trade. So this act told that from now on, no private trade. Private trade is not at all accepted. So that's what it told. Now, upon looking at all of this, this act seems to address a lot of problems, but still it has a lot of issues. There are many issues here. First of all, it did not abolish monopoly. It did not abolish monopoly, and the government says that you have to submit all the correspondence to us. You need to submit all the correspondence to us, and we will go through the correspondence and we will tell you whether or not these correspondences can be, is there any problems in these correspondences? Is there any corruption in this correspondences between you and the officials in India and among the officials in India? So, by the way how the British government has asked the East India Company to submit all of its accounts book, it appears as if the government is only going to look at the accounts book after every corruption has happened in India. It is not going to prevent corruption. It is only going to read and study and find out whether there is some corruption which happened there or not. So this is the first issue here. Then apart from that, there is also this idea that they told there should be no personal trade, private trade for the company officials. They told that, but that was not followed properly. The company officials continued to do private trade. They didn't care at all. They continued to do the private trade. Then they also talked about oppressive measures. They told that you should not deal with the native people in an oppressive manner. That was also one minor provision listed there. But that did not stop. They continued to be oppressive, and they didn't care about what the locals were asking for. So this was a huge issue there. Now, after this Regulating Act of 1773 did not really work very well, there was once again a lot of pressure on the British parliamentarians to enact one more law, and that law became the Pitt's India Act of 1784. So this Pitt's India Act made some definitive changes in the company structure. So here what did they do? First of all, this act, it tells that the supreme control of East India Company is no longer with the directors of the company, it is with the British government. So we will be the one who will have the supreme control over the East India Company. It also distinguished between the commercial and the political functions of the company. So what we will do is, they are telling, we will have this group of people called as court of directors. Then we will also have this group of people called as board of control. Court of directors of the company will deal with all the trading activities of the company. Board of control of the company will deal with all the political and administrative aspect of the company. So in this way, company itself was now divided into two groups of people having two sets of power. Then of course finally they told that we will also prohibit all the aggressive wars. No aggressive wars should be fought in India, because wars are very expensive, we are losing a lot of money, we should not fight, we should only focus on trading and expanding our businesses in India, that's all. So this was also one important notion given by the Pitt's India Act of 1784. Now what is the significance of this Pitt's India Act of 1784? The significance is that the company has actually become an instrument of British national policy, because the company does not have any sovereignty now, it has no individuality, it is the British government which is going to tell how the company should behave. So this is the biggest significance here. And the monopoly of East India Company was still not abolished. The merchants and traders in Britain, they were asking for the monopoly to be abolished so that they can do trade with India, not just the East India Company. But the British government was still adamant and it told that the monopoly will not be abolished. That tells how much of lobbying and how powerful the East India Company is in Britain. So this monopoly is continuing to exist. So this is the significance of the Pitt's India Act of 1784. Then you have Charter Act of 1813. So what about this Charter Act of 1813? So Charter Act of 1813 came at a very crucial time period. See, there was this person called as Napoleon Bonaparte. This Napoleon Bonaparte, he was actually imposing a war on Britain, an economic war on Britain. So he imposed something called as continental system in Europe. This continental system means that no British merchant or trader will be able to do trade with any part of Europe. He blocked all the access that Britain had with Europe. So Napoleon imposed this continental system against Britain, which was leading to a huge amount of pressure, economic pressure on Britain. And British people decided, the British traders and the government decided that in that case we have to open up our economy as much as possible so that we will be able to grab much more benefits from outside of Europe. We should not be dependent only with our trade with Europe, we should be also diversifying our trade basket. So for that reason, for the first time, monopoly of East India Company was ended and all British companies were now allowed to do trade with India and other British colonies all over the world. So this monopoly was abolished for the first time, but this monopoly was selectively abolished. The tea trade with China was still controlled by the East India Company only. It was not given to any other person, any other British merchant or trader. Now, apart from this important significant change in the Charter Act of 1813, there are also other changes that is present. See, by 1813, Britain has become fully industrialized. It has become completely industrialized, and the British industries have developed to such a great extent that they are now making a lot of products where they are wanting to sell their products in India rather than purchasing Indian products and selling it in Britain. So they want to do the ulta now. They don't want Indian products, they want to dump their products in India, because they have now attained a lot of capacity through industrialization, that they are able to make a lot of products in a short span of time. So because of this, they decided that they will go ahead and they will sell their goods in India. But Indians don't really understand what the British goods are. They don't find any connection with the British good. Culturally, Indians have grown accustomed to purchase only the traditionally available goods that they have access to. So because of this reason, Indians told that we don't really want to purchase any of your goods, and therefore we want to purchase only our goods. The British didn't like that answer. So the British decided that in that case, I will change your culture altogether. I will change your culture and I will ensure that you think that purchasing a British good is much elite and much superior than purchasing an Indian good. Only smart, superior, elite people will purchase British good. I will bring that perspective, that assumption in your head, says the British. So what did they do? They decided to change the culture. But how did they change the culture? In two ways. The first is that they brought in Western system of education into India. So if I am going to cultivate the Western school of thought in India, then every Indian will think like a Westerner, will think like a British, and will develop a taste for the British goods. So that is the first thing that they did. Second, they also decided that apart from this, we will also introduce Christianity in India. So Christianity in India, you should know, it is not new. Christians have been present in India for 2000 years. So British are not the ones who are bringing Christians to Indians. Christianity has been here for a long time. But when the British announced that they wanted to bring Christianity into India, what they mean is that we want to change your culture. We want to convert you to Christianity so that you will be way more amicable towards our rule in India. So in that way, they started to refine the Indian thought, and they brought in the Christian missionaries into India for the first time. All of this was having a huge impact in India, and this Charter Act of 1813, it eventually went on to culminate into Charter Act of 1833. As you saw earlier, Charter Act of 1813 itself was a huge leap forward. 1833 is an even bigger leap forward, because by 1833 the monopoly for East India Company is abolished without any exceptions. In the last act, they abolished monopoly except for tea trade with China. Now even that is abolished. And not just that, many Indian laws were codified, because the British by 1833, they are deliberately trying to rule over India, and for ruling over India, they needed to understand the local laws of India. So all the Indian laws, Hindu laws and Islamic laws, they were studied, they were codified, and they decided to impose Indian laws over Indians under their judges. So this is how they started to work. Apart from that, you should know that they also made one humongous change. From now on, the Governor General of Bengal will be called as the Governor General of India. William Bentinck happens to be the first Governor General of India. And this Governor General will have exclusive legislative powers for all of India. So he will have control over all of India. He will be the one who will decide what laws are going to be formed and created in the legislatures in the country. It also provided that the company's territories in India were held by it in trust of His Majesty, his heirs and successors. Meaning they have pretty much legalized, telling that all the possessions of East India Company in India, including Madras, Bombay, Bengal and all these places, are held by the East India Company for the British king. So it is the British king who is the actual owner of all these territories in India. That's what it means. And this Charter Act of 1833 is not the last of the Charter Acts. There was also Charter Act of 1853, but I am dealing with one of the most important acts only. So all these acts have a lot of significance. What significance can we talk about? First, you notice that slowly the company is losing its sovereignty and the British government is taking over. Law after law, that's what's happening here. So the British East India Company is getting subordinated, and eventually they become one with the British government eventually. So that's what's going to happen. And also, all these laws which were actually defined by the British, all these laws were designed in order to do administration efficiently for the British, but it was not for the welfare of Indians. The concept of welfare of Indians was never a part of these laws. So you can imagine how ironic it is. They are trying to rule over India without touching the subject of Indian welfare. How absurd it is. But that's what the British government and the British East India Company is doing in all of this. All these laws were meant for the political safety of British India, and also to ensure that all the British possessions in India are rendered as advantageous and as profitable as possible. So this is the purpose of all these laws as told by many analytical, many objective historians. Now, we go with the actual British policies in India, one after the other, starting with the economic policies of the British in India. So, when you want to know the economic policies of the British in India, we have to talk about the nature of the British here. So, there is a picture that is given here, a picture of a coin, a commemorative coin with the image of this great man called as Dadabhai Naoroji. So, what does he have to do with the economic policy of the British is the question. See, the British were very different people in India, very different people in India. They were not the first foreigners to come to India. If we talk about the first foreigners to come to India, the Aryans came in 1500 BC. After that, Central Asians came. After that, Huns came. Hunas or Huns, they came. After that, this Delhi Sultanate came. Turkish people came. And after that, the Mughals came. The Mongols came. And then the British came. So, foreigners coming to India is not a huge deal. But you should know, there is a huge difference between all those people who have come before the British and the British. There is a lot of difference. Now, what is the difference? All those people who came before the British, when they came to India, they settled down in India, they embraced the Indian culture, they embraced the Indian soil, they embraced the Indian people, they contributed their culture to the India, they embraced the culture, ethnicity and the people of India, they lived as Indians and they made a lot of money here, they invested all that money in India and they died as Indians. Everybody, up until Aurangzeb, everybody, yes. But the British, they remained perpetual foreigners. They were willfully remaining foreigners. They did not want to assimilate with India. They do not want to become a part of India. They didn't want to become a part of India, and all they wanted was to use India for the enrichment of Britain. So this kind of an ideology, this kind of systematic exploitation over several decades, tens of decades, has never occurred to India earlier before in any part of Indian history. This is the first time India has been exploited by the British, and this economic drain of India by the British was actually explained by Dadabhai Naoroji with evidence. Dadabhai Naoroji was the one who actually brought out the evidence for this, who disproved the myth that the British are good people. No, he is the one who told that you are draining all of our economy and you are enriching, you are industrializing Britain with all the resources that you take from India. He is the one who exposed this to all of Indians and to all of the world. That's why his picture is here. He understood the British economic policies very well. Now, the British economic policies are dictated because of certain changes that happened in Britain. Some changes really happened in Britain. So, what changes really happened there? First of all, the expanding of export markets. See, the British have been colonizing a lot of territories. The more they colonize, the bigger their market becomes. So, with more and more colonies, they have more and more places to dump all their goods. So, that's an issue here. Therefore, the British went on colonizing to dump a lot of their goods, and by colonizing, they were able to dump a lot of their goods. So, both sides it is true. Therefore, this expansion of colonies equals expansion of markets for the British. So, that's one serious change. The British were able to expand colonies at a much higher rate than any other colonial power in Britain. Then the accumulation of capital. See, in India, capital is there, meaning money is there, resources there. But who is holding that resource? It is the Indian kings. So, what did the Indian kings do? The Indian kings, you had all this money, they put it in their treasury. They spent it whenever they wanted to maybe watch a dance or hear some music. They will ask these people to come and sing for them. They will maybe patronize some paintings. They will probably patronize some monuments. So, in this way, Indian rulers spent money. What about Britain? In Britain, money was not held by rulers. The king was not having the money. The people had the money. That too, not people like zamindars, the actual people, the businessmen, the enterprising businessmen in Britain, they had all this money. So what did they do with that money? They invested this money in businesses to make more money. And when they got that money, they reinvested that money back into businesses. In that way, the growth rate of businesses in Britain was much higher than that of India. So this difference also is a huge point to understand here. It is because of this reason only Britain was able to industrialize much faster, and India has been lacking in its enterprising spirit. Increase in population. With more and more industrialization happening, people started to have more and more babies. The population of Britain started to rise. With rising British population, it was helpful in a lot of ways, because all these people who are now born, when they come of age, they can now be employed in all these factories. So the workforce was created in Britain with increase in population. This also became very beneficial to the British. And of course, the government itself was very highly interested in manufacturing sector. The government was giving a lot of incentives to the British traders and enterprise owners, all these business people. Government was encouraging the business people to do a lot of manufacturing. You do a lot of manufacturing here so that we will be able to sell all these goods elsewhere and get all the money. We have the advantage of industries. All other countries in the world are behind us. Britain is the first country in the world to be industrialized, and therefore they had a head start. So government was trying to encourage this head start as much as possible, so that they will be able to have a lot of commercial influence all over the world. And of course, development of technology. Development of technology happened because of development of science. Development of science and technology happened because of Renaissance, where there was a lot of free thought and liberty which was guaranteed in Britain but not in India. So in this way, the British were able to gain a lot of head start in building a strong and prosperous economy, and the Indians were not able to do that. It is in this context only we have to study the British policies with India, economic policies with India. How was the economic policy with India? It was brutal to Indians, because the British, as we just saw, they were producing a lot of goods and they were looking for places to dump all those goods. Now India has always exported its goods to other countries. It never really imported much of anything. The only thing it imported was actually gold and silver in exchange for all the exports that it is making. Now the British, they didn't want that. They want their goods to be sold all over the world wherever Indians are selling their goods. Not just that, they also wanted to sell their goods in India itself. So in this manner, the economic policies of the British in India start. I will talk about one example. Cotton textile industry. India has been the home to the world's oldest cotton textile industry. The world's first evidence of cotton cultivation comes from Meherga, present in current Pakistan. So this cotton textile industry is flourishing in India since ancient times. India has been the supplier of cotton all over the world, and Britain, by that point in time, they decided that they want to sell their cotton textiles that they make in all the countries of the world and in India as well. But there was one problem. The British people themselves still purchased only Indian made goods. They didn't purchase British made goods, because having an Indian good was a symbol of prestige, and therefore they didn't really go for British made goods even though it is very cheap. So the British were not happy. So what did they do? They first told that Indian goods, Indian cotton textiles shall not be sold in Britain. They told it shall not be sold in Britain. It is told that if any Indian goods come into Britain, those goods will be confiscated and burnt away. Any Indian cotton textile goods. So they banned the import of Indian made goods into Britain. But still, through black market, people were buying Indian made goods. So then they put the next law, which is, if anybody is found to be holding on to some Indian made good, even if it is a small handkerchief, those people will be fined on spot. Government enacted one more law. So look at how brutal the laws were made to prevent Indian imports into Britain. And finally, the people had no other option but to support only British goods, but to purchase only British made cotton textiles. The British were not done. They wanted to actually dismantle the Indian cotton textile industry altogether, and they wanted to dump their goods in India as well. So what did they do? In India, they come and they say that we want to say that all the cotton that you are cultivating here in India, all this cotton will be sold only to us. You cannot sell the raw cotton to any Indian manufacturer. Indian manufacturer will have to buy from us only. So we have monopoly over purchase of raw cotton. The British officials told in India. Once raw cotton was held by them, the Indian manufacturers now went and asked the British, sell us the raw cotton. The British said, fine, I will sell you the raw cotton. This is the price, they told. And that price was 10 times higher than the actual price. The Indian manufacturers could not purchase all the raw cotton that they originally used to purchase. So they started to purchase less only. They couldn't purchase a lot. All the excessive raw cotton that was not sold was sent to Britain for the British cotton textile manufacturers in Britain to use this raw cotton to make cheap cotton clothes. Then on top of which, Indians were also then trying to make with whatever they have. They wanted to cultivate, they wanted to manufacture cotton textiles with whatever cotton that they have in India. They wanted to do that. They decided to manufacture cotton in India, continue the manufacturing of cotton in India, but they realized that there was no laborers found, because the British officials in India, they told that all these laborers will no longer work for you, they will work only for me. Then how do we make the cotton textiles? That's your problem, we don't care. The British employed these laborers in their owned British owned cotton textile industries in India. And even that did not go along well, because these laborers were paid less than 1/4 of what they used to get paid. Earlier, they used to get paid around 100 rupees, let's say for example 100 rupees per month. Now they are paid less than 25 rupees per month, which is not viable. Later it became even less than 10 rupees per month. All these laborers told, we don't want to work for you, we will go and work for the Indian manufacturers themselves. They decided to quit that job and they wanted to go to the Indian manufacturers who are willing to pay the 100 rupees to get work done from the Indian laborers, cotton textile laborers. But the British told the Indian manufacturers, see, I am giving them a salary of 10 rupees per month. If you employ them, you cannot give them a salary of more than 9 rupees per month. So in that way, the cotton textile manufacturers in India, even if they could pay them higher wages, they were unable to pay them higher wages. They created loss. All these laborers did not have any place to go. So what did they do? They decided that this cotton textile industry will not put food on table, and therefore many of them quit this profession and they went to do agriculture. So many skilled laborers were unable to continue with whatever that they were doing. They left it and they started to go away. They started to go for other occupations. In this way, the British dismantled all these cotton textile industries in India, and eventually what happens, all the British made goods were brought into India, dumped in India, and the Indian people had no other option but to purchase only British made goods. So this is how the British did what we call as one-way free trade. They talk about free trade a lot, but all this free trade is happening only in one way. It is free for the British, it is not free for the Indians. So in this way, cotton textile industry was brought down to its knees, and similarly all the other industries were also brought down to its knees. This is how the British dismantled and demolished the manufacturing sector of Indian economy. The colonial British destroyed the manufacturing sector of the Indian economy. So that's what I have given in all these slides, so I am simply switching it over. Then the concept of industrialization should be studied. See, the British are an industrialized nation, and it is fair for anybody to assume that because they are industrialized, wherever they go and colonize, they would of course industrialize that place also, we would think. But in reality, that is not the case. In reality, what happened was the British deindustrialized India. As we saw, they deindustrialized India, and this is primarily because of the fact that the secondary sector of India has been dismantled completely by the British. There are no industries available, and the British made sure that their own industries back in Britain did not come and invest in India. There should be no industrialization in India, only then Indians will always be at the very low level, so that they will be able to simply give their own goods and sell their own goods in India and make them purchase it. If Indians develop their own industries, then they will start their manufacturing sector, with which they will be the ones who will be supplying the British, which is not in the commercial interest of the British East India Company, and therefore they deindustrialized India altogether. Because of deindustrialization, what is the consequence? The consequence is de-urbanization. So many urban centers of India were abandoned by the people. If there is no scope for economic activity, if there is no industries, there is no way in which urban centers can exist anywhere. So urban centers were declining. For example, Machilipatnam or Masulipatnam was a huge urban center in the current coast of Andhra Pradesh. That Machilipatnam was such a huge urban center in the ancient and medieval times. Under the British, it came to a standstill. It became de-urbanized. When it became de-urbanized, what was the consequence? Ruralization. So now villages started to become more and more. So under the British, de-urbanization and ruralization also started to happen. More and more people started to engage only in village economy. There was only village economy going on, because all the secondary sector economy is now consumed by the British dumping of goods only. So India has no scope for developing its secondary sector economy. Because of this ruralization, what is the consequence? The consequence is that now so many millions of people are now turning back to agriculture. Everybody is turning back to agriculture. What does that lead to? Pressure on land. See, the land is limited. The amount of harvest that you can make from a piece of land is limited only. It is not going to change. But if more and more people are going to do cultivation in the same piece of land, it means everybody is going to get a lesser and lesser share of the harvest. So that's how it is going to be. If there is one land where I get 100 bags of rice individually, I am going to be fine. But if 100 people are going to do agriculture in that same piece of land, then each will get only 1 bag of rice, which is not at all viable. So in that way, agriculture was also facing a lot of problems, and it eventually led to impoverishment of the Indian people and the drain of the Indian wealth altogether. The British ensured that they made all the money from India and took that money back to Britain, invest in their country, invest in the industrialization of their country. This is how Britain became industrialized. The British industrialization story is on the base of Indian economy only. Had Indian economy not supported, Britain would not have industrialized at the rate at which it industrialized at that point in time. This is because of the drain of wealth. Now, while all of this may be one aspect of the economic policies, you should also know that the concept of transport and communication also is a part of British economic policies. The British were the ones who introduced railways in India, who introduced postal system, organized uniform postal system in India, who also introduced telegraph system in India. So the British do all of this, but once again, all these things were not for the welfare of Indians. The railways were created in order to transport the British goods from the seaport to all the hinterland cities. The railways were connecting all the seaports with all the internal urban centers so that they will be able to sell all their goods to the Indian public. And also, the railway was created in such a way that if Indians wanted to move their goods using the railways, they will be charged a higher price. If the British wanted to move their goods through railways, they will be charged a lower price. So in that way, it was biased against Indian commerce. Indians should not do commerce. We will be the one who will be doing the commerce. And also, by having all these railways all across the country, they were able to rapidly mobilize troops everywhere. They were able to take troops from one place to another and conduct a lot of wars everywhere. So this is how the railways were useful for the British. And railways is one thing. There is also, as I told earlier, telegraph system and postal system. Telegraph and postal system both were created by Lord Dalhousie. So these systems of communication, they were done in order to enhance the British communication and not Indian people's communication. Indian people, they started to use telegraph, postal system and railways because Indian people were resourceful. The British were making all these different communication and transportation methods for their benefit only. So here also they have done all these things for the sake of their commercial and economic growth. So this is also a part of the British economic policy. Now that we have looked at the economic policy, we will look at now the land revenue policy of the British in India. So here we have to talk about what was present before, what is present now. Earlier there was the king. The king appointed, the Mughal emperor for example, appointed people called as Jagirdar. The Jagirdar were large in numbers and they all paid their share of the state revenue, the land revenue to the king. For example, the king may ask for, let's say for example, 40% land revenue I want, the king would say. The Jagirdar would take 10% and they will pay the king 40%. So they will be charging 50% to the people underneath them. And underneath them comes the Zamindar. The Zamindar has to pay 50% to the Jagirdar and they would want their 10%. So what would they do? They would charge the people underneath them 60%. So the people underneath them, that is the peasants. So this is how the land revenue system worked earlier. Now under the British also it is going to be the same, but it is going to be way more exploitative. It is going to be extremely cruelly exploitative, criminally exploitative. How it is, we will see now. There are 3 land revenue policies brought by the British in India, created by the British in India. Major land revenue policies. The first is permanent land revenue settlement, also called as Zamindari system. Second is Rayatwari settlement or Rayatwari system. Third is Mahalwari settlement or Mahalwari system. So what does these 3 mean? We will look at them one by one, starting with permanent land revenue settlement. So this permanent land revenue settlement, it is also called as Zamindari system, as I told earlier. So how does it work? So here you have a picture. You have the British, you have the Zamindar, then you have the peasant at the bottom. It's a triangle, it's a pyramid, pointed pyramid. So peasants are large in number, above them you have many Zamindars, and then you have the single British government. The Zamindar's job is to collect the revenue from the peasants and give it to the British after taking their share. This is the purpose of the zamindari system. But understand, this zamindari system is actually created by the British in a very unique fashion. Earlier I mentioned about a group of people called as Jagirdar and the Mughal emperor. Well, right now the Mughal emperor is out of the picture. He is weak, he is not collecting land revenue. The British are the ones who are collecting land revenue. Because the Mughal revenue is out of the picture, the Jagirdar is also out of the picture. The Jagirdar is also not there. So he is also absent, the Mughal emperor is absent. Now only zamindar is left. The British decide that we will deal with the zamindars ourselves. So the first change that they made in the system is to eliminate the top 2 people. Then the next change that they did is that they told that the zamindars from now on are not just revenue collectors, they are the land owners. What does it mean? Even before, the zamindars were called as landlords only, right? Yeah, they were landlords but not land owners, not necessarily. It is usually the king who is the land owner. Everybody under the kingdom is actually paying the rent to the king for being in that land. So zamindar used to be the landlord, now he is the land owner, the British told. Not just that, the British also told the zamindar is a hereditary land owner, meaning after the zamindar dies, it is the zamindar's son who will be the next landowner. So it is going to be this one family who is going to control one huge swath of land. Like that there are thousands of zamindars all over the country. Hundreds of zamindars, certainly hundreds of zamindars, including many thousands of zamindars, they were also present all over the country. So in that way they created a new hereditary landlord class in India. That was a big blunder. They also told that these zamindars will have all the rights over the land, and the peasants who are present in the land, they can deal with the peasants however they want. The peasants will have to listen to whatever the zamindar says. Peasants should not come to us. So what did the zamindars do? They started exploiting the peasants. Now here is where there is one issue. See, the zamindars initially the zamindars were very sympathetic towards the peasants because they were all traditional zamindars. They are all very traditional zamindars who have been holding land for several generations. They were landlords for several generations. These zamindars are given these rights by the British, and the zamindars are happy, of course. The peasants didn't really complain. But problem arose because of certain caveats put by the British. The British told that I am introducing something called as sunset law. Sunset law. What does it mean? It means every year on this particular day, on that one particular day, and at that sunset of that particular day, you will have to pay me the full land revenue that you owe the government. The zamindar has to pay the full land revenue to the government. If the zamindar does not pay the land revenue to the government, then the government will take away the land from the zamindar, throw the zamindar out of the land, and auction this land to some other person who is willing to give that land revenue on that date correctly every year. So this is how the British told that we are going to deal with you guys, they told. Now these traditional zamindars, they were very sympathetic towards the peasants because they know how difficult it is to do agriculture. They know how many variables are there, and therefore they were actually trying to be very sympathetic towards the peasants. So even if the peasants was not able to pay the land revenue fully to the zamindar, the traditional zamindar was empathetic. So what did he do? He paid it out of his own pocket to the British. Now he did this for several seasons, but eventually the zamindar ran out of money and the peasants also could not produce much more. So what happened here? The British kicked out the traditional zamindar and auctioned the land. When they auctioned the land, a new person becomes the landlord. This new person has never held land in his life. He is a new landlord, a new zamindar, and this new zamindar has absolutely no emotion towards the peasants, no idea about agriculture, and what he does is he says, I simply want money. You pay me this money or else I will throw you out of the land. He threatens the peasants. The peasants had to toil hard, and still many peasants were thrown out, and this new zamindar was behaving in a very, very heartless manner thanks to the British policy. This is how slowly all the traditional zamindars were thrown out and a new class of zamindars, money-minded, greedy zamindars were brought in. Now these zamindars, you should know, they were causing much more trouble than needed. What did they do? See, these zamindars were causing trouble in certain ways. For example, there is this phenomenon called as absentee landlordism. What does it mean? So these new zamindars who came from outside of the village, they don't really know agriculture, they don't know anything. Now, when they came from outside of the village, they started to ask for money from the peasants. After getting the money, they will leave and they will go to the urban center, they will go to the city from where they come from. They will be there, they will do their businesses and everything over there, and they won't be present in the village at all. So they will not invest any time in improving agriculture, improving the land, taking care of the welfare of peasants, resolving disputes in the villages. Nothing is done by the zamindar. Because of absentee landlordism, agriculture system in India, agricultural practice in India started to deteriorate. That is the first issue. Apart from absentee landlordism, there was also another problem called as sub-infeudation. Sub-infeudation. So what does it mean? Sub-infeudation means the same case where the zamindars did not want to do any work. So what did they do? They decided that I don't want to do any work. So what I will do is I will give my work to someone else. For example, the British government says you have to pay me 50% land revenue to the zamindar. The British government is saying whatever land revenue is going on is land revenue you get, 50% should come to the government. If I get that 50%, I will let you stay as a zamindar, or else I will throw you out. The British are telling. Now the zamindar, this new zamindar, he has no motivation to go and get the money from the peasants. It's a tedious job. He doesn't even understand this job. So he says, I will sublet my land to another zamindar. Let that zamindar collect the land revenue and give it to me. So what will I do? Government is asking for 50%. I will ask that zamindar for 55%. He will sublet his land to another zamindar. That zamindar, he will do the same thing by subletting that to another zamindar for 60%. Then another zamindar will come with 65%, 70, 75, 80, 85. It went on up to 98.5%. So the peasants will have to pay 98.5% of their land revenue, which means they get nothing. They lose everything that they have because there are so many middlemen between the peasant and the British. There are so many zamindars. There are instances where there were up to 50 sub-infeudatories between the British and the peasants. That's how bad it was. So this sub-infeudation process is also the result of this permanent land revenue settlement. Now, this land revenue policy, permanent land revenue policy, it has its merits and demerits. What are the merits? First of all, the British tell that I am making the zamindar the land owner, not just the landlord, the land owner, because these zamindars have no other option but to invest in their land, because now they are the owner. Because they are the owner, they will have the incentive to invest in their land, improve their land. Once it is improved, they are going to have a high prosperous harvest. The peasant is going to have a prosperous harvest. We will also get our share of revenue without any difficulty. This was the British mentality, because this is what they followed in Britain, and it worked out very well. All land was given to it was made private ownership, because of which agriculture improved in Britain. So they thought in India, the zamindars are the land owners here, they are the agriculturalists here, and therefore they should be given all the control over the land. But what happened was that while they gave the land, while they privatized and commodified land in India, this land revenue policy that they had was very high in its rate and very abusive in its nature. Therefore, even if a person makes a single mistake, they will be punished very severely. Therefore, nobody wanted to make a mistake. Everybody wanted to pass the buck to the next person. And eventually, the peasant is the one who is going to suffer all the problems. So here the merit is that the zamindar being made the landowner, he will be able to ensure the welfare of the land and welfare of the farmer, thinks the British. The British also say that it provides security for everybody and it gives financial security for the British. It creates a political ally with that of zamindar. We are empowering the zamindar, so the zamindar will later support us also. And also, it reduces the cost of running administration. We don't have to go and collect the revenue from the people. The zamindars will do the job. We will not do the job. So these are all the merits of this permanent land revenue system. But it has a lot of demerits also, which cannot be questioned. The problem is, this permanent land revenue system, what it did is, it made the zamindars owners, the traditional zamindars as land owners, and then kicked all the traditional zamindars out of the land. It brought in all the greedy zamindars who did not care about improving the land, taking care of the welfare of the peasants. Therefore, it was a problem. And also, it created a new class of hereditary landlords. This kind of hereditary landlords and hereditary landowners was never present in India. Usually the king is a landowner. Now these people are treated as landowners. And in all cases these zamindars were always favorable to the British and they sided with the British in all throughout the British Indian history up until freedom. They supported the British only. And of course, it also led to the beggar system where many peasants were forced to work for the zamindar's private land free of cost. Why? Because the peasant cannot go to the British to get justice. The zamindar can do whatever he wants to do with the peasants. So in this way, it became very, very exploitative. So these are all the merits and demerits of the zamindari system or the permanent land revenue system. Then you have the Rayatwari settlement created by Thomas Munro. So Rayatwari settlement was created by the governor of Madras, Thomas Munro, and permanent land revenue system was created by Lord Cornwallis, who was the Governor General of Bengal. So Rayatwari system was introduced, and here what is different here? It is same as that of the zamindari system only, it is same. However, there is one difference. In zamindari system, there was the British, zamindar and the peasants. In the Rayatwari system, there is the British and the peasants, no zamindar. Rayatwari system was implemented in places where there was no concept of zamindars in India. In whichever part of India there was no concept of zamindar, that's where the Rayatwari system was introduced. So here what did they do? The British told there is no need of a zamindar, there is no need of a middleman. We will collect the revenue from the peasants directly, the British decided. Now there is no middleman, which means probably this Rayatwari settlement is probably good for the Indians, one would think, the peasants, one would think, but actually it was not. It was actually worse, because there is no middleman here, there is no zamindar here, but the British government decided to play the role of the British government as well as the role of the zamindar. The government told that now there is no middleman here, I want to increase the taxes. They told the minimum rate of tax is 55%. 55% of taxes is the amount which we are fixing. 55% is very, very high. If I am going to give more than half of what I earn to you, I would have very little left with me. And on top of which, they also asked to pay only in cash. They made the Indian peasants pay the British only in cash. Now cash is not in good circulation in India. So therefore, they started to borrow money from money lenders. Now these money lenders, they gave easy money, easy loan to all these peasants who wanted cash. But They charged exorbitant amount of interest. Because of the exorbitant amount of interest, what happens is that the money lenders started to corner all these peasants who could not pay back the money, and they started to take away their land from the peasants. Money lenders took the land from the peasants, and eventually these money lenders became the new landlords and the new zamindars under the Rights settlement. Rights settlement was instituted in Madras and Bombay presidencies, in these regions. And the money lenders were the ones who were exploiting the peasants, not the zamindars. And finally, you have the Mahalwari settlement. Now, Mahalwari settlement, what does this do? This Mahalwari settlement do? Mahalwari settlement was instituted under the time of William Bentinck. Now, here they divide the entire villages, entire groups of villages into what is called as mahals. It means estate. So, not just one piece of land, but all the pieces of land in a village, and sometimes even many villages combined, will form one mahal. And this mahal will have this person who is the head of the mahal, who is the village head. That village head will be the one who is responsible to collect the revenue from all of this mahal and pay the British. This head, his name is called as Lambardar. That is a term given to the head. This Lambardar will be the one who will collect the revenue. Here, you should know, it is not the individual responsibility of the peasant, it is the collective responsibility of the villages and the estate to come together and pay the revenue to the British. So, was this a successful land revenue settlement? No. Here, whatever the zamindar did, the Lambardar did. Whatever the zamindar did in permanent land revenue system, the Lambardar did in this land revenue system. So, in this way, this Mahalwari settlement was also exploitative, where he started to behave, the Lambardar started to behave as if he is the owner of all this land present in his mahal. So, this was also exploitative, and this was also causing a lot of problems for the peasants. The state's share of the revenue was put at 66% of the rental value, which means 2/3, not half. 2/3 of what you earn will go as a tax. So, imagine how much money you would have. If you earned 100 rupees, you will pay 66 rupees as tax. You will be left with only 34 rupees in your hand. That's how bad it was, this Mahalwari system. Now, this land revenue policy, we have to know the impact of all this land revenue policy. There are many impact here. First impact is commodification of land. For the first time, land is made into a commodity, very, very freely tradable commodity, where it can be purchased and sold very easily, which means the peasant who is cultivating that land is now not safe. They don't have any safety of tenure. So, that's a huge problem. And also, the high taxes faced by the farmers made them poor. Because of these high taxes, the peasants many of them could not continue with farming. Many of them left farming and they started to beg for food. That's how bad it was. The land revenue policy also changed the cropping pattern, because people realized that if I have to pay this high amount of tax that they are asking me to pay, then I cannot simply cultivate rice or wheat. I have to cultivate cash crops like that of indigo or saffron, because only with cash crops I will start to make more money, and only then I will be able to pay this tax that they are asking, this high tax that they are asking. So, cropping pattern in India changed, where people started to cultivate a lot of cash crops. This also resulted in food insecurity in India. And then also there became this problem of consolidation of power by some groups of people, consolidation of power over resources by some groups of people. At the time of independence, you should know, 7% of villagers in India controlled 75% of all the agricultural land in India. 7% people controlling 75% of resources. So, imagine how bad it is. This is because of these land revenue policies instituted by the British. So, that's the story of land revenue policy of the British. Now, we will look at the administrative policy of the British. What about the administration here? There are 4 different facets of British administration: civil services, army, police and judiciary. You look at civil services first. So the civil services concept was instituted by Lord Cornwallis. He is called as the father of Indian civil services or Imperial Civil Services, ICS, what we call today as IAS, the exam that you are going to appear for. So this ICS was instituted by Lord Cornwallis, and what he wanted to do was to eradicate the corruption in the East India Company by creating a cadre of officials who will simply work for the company for a salary instead of engaging in private trade. So this is how this concept of civil services was created by Cornwallis. But you should know, the special feature of this Indian civil services created by Cornwallis was that only in the name there was Indian. There were actually no Indians in this ICS service. Everybody was British only. They called it as Indian Civil Service, but it was actually only the British people who are sitting in the positions. So what is the problem here with this Indian Civil Services? Why Indians were not actually brought into the picture? The problem is, first of all, the British were creating their own style of administration. They are creating an administration which is going to benefit the British homeland at the expense of Indians. So if I am going to include Indians in that administration, that is antithetical to what I am trying to achieve. Therefore, I don't want Indians here, I want only British people, because we are going to work for the upliftment of our motherland. So this is the initial assumption. But also you should know, many of the British officials, especially Cornwallis, did not trust the Indians, and he openly told that Indians do not have any integrity, all Indians are corrupt, Cornwallis says. So Indians were not brought into these services, British were employed in huge numbers, and eventually there were some Indians who were actually brought in. Some Indians were brought in. But for what? But for menial job only, to clean the floors, to housekeep all the officials' accommodations, their homes, to ensure that proper sanitation is maintained in and around the facilities of the government offices. So for these purposes, for doing all the menial jobs, Indians were indulged. Apart from that, Indians were not at all engaged in any forms of employment under the civil administration of the British. Eventually, the civil services grew, and the Indians were also brought into civil services after the revolt of 1857. Only after 1857, many Indians started to become a part of this ICS cadre. And this ICS cadre grew to be such a strong institution that later Vallabhbhai Patel calls it as the steel frame of India. It is the framework based on which the entire country runs its administration. Then you have army. So when you talk about the British Indian Army, the army has 4 functions for the British. The first function, for conquest. For the sake of conquest, I am having an army. Second function, to defend my territory, British Indian territory, from foreign rivals. So that is a second function for the army. Third, to defend the British territory from Indian rivals, all the Indian kings. That's the third function. And the fourth function is to engage in wars outside of India, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in Burma, in Afghanistan, in Nepal, in Sri Lanka, in all these places, where we will take the army from India to fight over there. So these are the functions of the British Indian Army. This army was created, and it was a very disciplined army created by the British. And you should know, of the total 3 lakh and odd personnel who were present there in the British Indian Army, more than 2,65,000 people were Indians only, which means the number of British officials is less than 50,000 soldiers. That's how many soldiers who were present, who are of British origin. 2,65,000 were actually of Indian origin only. So if there are so many Indians present in the army, very little British present in the army, why didn't the Indians actually just take over all these British officials, kill them off and take over the administration. This is the question. Why didn't Indians do that if they are in larger number? The answer is twofold. One, for the Indians to come together to fight against the British, Indians need something called as nationalism. That thought of nationalism was not there for Indians. Every Indian identified himself or herself only as a Marathi, as a Tamil, as a Kannadiga, as a Malayali, as a Gujarati, as a Bengali. So that's how they identified themselves. They didn't look at themselves as Indians. They identified themselves as Hindu, a Muslim, a Sikh, a Parsi, not as Indians. They identified themselves based on a caste. I belong to this caste or that caste. So Indians did not have nationalism, and that's one reason for them not coming together. But there is one more reason, and that is loyalty to the British. Indian soldiers who were serving in the British army were very loyal to the British. They did not want to overthrow the rulers who were paying them regular salary. No Indian king is paying them regular salary. The British were the only ones who were paying regular salary, and therefore I will not actually betray my British masters, says all these soldiers. So this is how Indian soldiers remained subservient to the British. Then you have the police. So what about the police? Cornwallis is also the one who instituted the police system in India. Now in India there was already this concept of Kotwal. Kotwal means police officials who has been present in India since Delhi Sultanate time. So here they are institutionalizing the police system in India by Cornwallis. He created this, he created different levels of police organization. And with the help of the police, Cornwallis and other British Governor Generals were able to reduce the crimes happening in India, and with that reduction in crime, it became easier for the British to rule over the country. It became more and more easier. But you should know, these police officials, in most cases, they were used by the British, they were bribed by the zamindars and rich people to target all the poor people. Whenever the peasants were revolting against zamindar, the police were bribed and the police were asked to go and curb them. So in this way, the police system was often called as a corrupt system, and the people never really trusted the police. So this was a huge issue with regards to the police. Then comes the judicial system. Under the British, it was once again Lord Cornwallis who created the hierarchical multi-tier judicial system in India. So Lord Cornwallis, he created separate courts for civil cases and for criminal cases. For civil cases, he actually created the lowest court as the Amin court. That's the lowest court. We look at the civil cases, civil courts first. Lowest court is the Amin court. In that Amin court, there is this person called as Munsif, who is an Indian. This Munsif is the one who is going to give the judgments. Then if you want to appeal above the lowest court, then you go to the district court called as Diwani Adalat. So you go to the district court, and here you have a sessions judge. This session judge, he is a British official. He is not an Indian, he is a British official. And if you want to go higher than this, if you want to appeal higher from the session court, then you go to the Provincial Court of Appeal. Provincial Court of Appeal, which is present in 4 places: Dhaka, Murshidabad, Patna and Calcutta. In 4 places you have this Provincial Court of Appeal. If you want to appeal even higher than that, then you go to the Sardar Diwani Adalat. That's the high court, that's the one of the highest courts in the appeal structure. So Sardar Diwani Adalat is the highest court, and if you want to appeal even higher than that, then you can do that, but you have to go to the King of England only. You have to go to the King of England and take your case, and whatever the King of England says, his judgment is final. He will not be able to, he cannot really change. His verdict cannot be changed. So this is with regards to the civil court. Then you look at the criminal court. So the criminal court, once again you have the lowest court, which is called as Darog-e Adalat. That is the lowest court. This lowest court will also comprise of one Indian judge only. And then appeals from this lowest court will go to the district criminal court. District criminal court, where there will be a session judge who will be a British. From this district criminal court, you will go to the next appeal, which is the circuit courts. The circuit court and that provincial court of appeal which we saw earlier, both are present in the same place only. Murshidabad, Patna, Calcutta and Dhaka. In these 4 places, the circuit courts are present. If you want to appeal higher than the circuit court, once again you go to the Sardar Divani Adalat, the highest court. And from Sardar Divani Adalat, if you want to appeal even higher, you cannot go to the King of England, you will go to the Governor General of Bengal. So for criminal cases, the highest verdict will come from the Governor General of Bengal. Apart from that, from his verdict, there is no appeal at all. So this is the judicial system in India. Now when we talk about judicial system in India introduced by the British, I have to talk about 2 things. The first is a new concept brought out by the British called as rule of law. Rule of law, what does it mean? It means that people will have to appeal, people will have to follow all the procedure that is written in the law. So if I have to resolve a dispute, I have to go to the court system, follow all the procedure, and as a result of that procedure, my dispute will be resolved. So everything will have to be done based on protocol, based on procedure only. You cannot digress from protocol. There is no scope for discretion given. This rule of law concept was introduced by the British in India to avoid any discretionary power given to any authorities, because many of these authorities can behave in a biased manner, can behave in a corrupt manner. So for that, this rule of law concept is brought into India, which is of course in theory a welcome step. Apart from this, they also brought in another concept called as equality before law, where they told that everybody is equal in front of the law. In the eyes of the law, everybody is equal. So this is also on paper a very welcome concept to be brought into India. That is good. However, both of them did not really work well for Indians. There are reasons for it. If you look at the concept of equality before law, first of all, this equality before law was not practiced properly. The British, the European people were treated at a higher level, at a in a more lenient way by the judicial system than the Indians. If there is a case, a court case between an Indian and a European, the courts, the judges always favor the Europeans only, because except at the lowest level, every other judge on top is a British judge only. Therefore, all of them sided with the European only and not the Indians. So equality before law was not really practiced. Apart from that, they also created something called as legal inequality. What really happened? They told that you have to follow the rule of law. That rule of law means I have to go to the court, I have to pay the court fee, I have to pay the lawyer's fee, I have to then appeal and then appeal and then appeal, I have to pay these fees again and again and again, and it is going to go on dragging for several years, and still I would not get my justice. If I am not able to get my justice with all these things that is happening, what would be the condition of my finances? I would lose all my money in the name of trying to get my justice through this court system. So even though before the institution of that court system, there was some very informal form of justice being awarded in India, that was efficient, that was quick. See, earlier kings and zamindars and jagirdars used to award justice. When they award justice, sometimes of course it was biased only, but still it was quick. Indians didn't have to stand in queue to get justice, and this justice system is so complicated that Indians don't even understand how it works. So because of all these complications and everything, what happened was only educated people, only rich zamindars and filthy rich people were able to use the justice system to their benefit. Nobody else, no common man was able to get justice through the justice system, because he or she does not have money to traverse this judicial setup laid out by the British. This created what is called as legal inequality. So in this way, the judicial system was also biased in a very, very cruel manner. Now you look at socio-cultural policy of the British. When I talk about the socio-cultural policy, if you remember, I talked about it in the Charter Act of 1813. When 1813 Charter Act was enacted, the British brought in a lot of Christian missionaries as well as instituted Western education into India. Why? Because they wanted to change the socio-cultural attitude of Indians. They wanted to change the Indian society. They wanted to change the Indian culture. So, for them to do that, the primary reason is twofold. One, Napoleon, who is creating a lot of economic hardship for Britain, and number two, the industrial revolution which Britain had. Because of industrial revolution, they were able to produce a lot of goods, and now they want to change India into the market for British goods. For these two purposes, socio-cultural policy was undertaken by the British in order to change the Indian society and Indian culture. The British also wanted to change the Indian society in such a way that French Revolution does not have any impact in India. See, French Revolution happened in France, where you should know that French people started to embrace this new concept of nationalism. Because of nationalism, what happened is the French people, they decided that we will have to get France into the hands of French people rather than French monarchs. The rulers are exploitative, people should be the one who should rule over France. They told that in the French Revolution. Now if that idea comes to Indians, it is not in the interest of the British who are ruling over India. And therefore, the British decide that any aspect of French Revolution should not come to India, and therefore we should tilt the Indian orientation favorable to the British, and therefore we have to get them acclimatized to the British taste and the British education and the British thought before they experience any nationalism from the French. So this is also one reason why they changed the socio-cultural policy of India. The intellectual revolution happening in Britain is also assisting this. Many British intellectuals, they say that we the British are the world's most civilized, most cultured people, and in all our colonies, including India, we have to spread our culture. We have to tell these people, these natives, that our British culture is better than their culture. So for this reason also, the British wanted to change the socio-culture policy of India. Here is where I want to talk about three important concepts: rationalism, humanism, and progress. Now, what is rationalism? It means evidence-based thought. So they say, British intellectuals say, we have to spread rationalism to Indians. We have to teach them how to think based on evidence. Then they also told that we have to speak of humanism as well. You have to think of humanism, because humanism means that all humans have the capacity to rise by themselves. All humans have the capacity to become great thinkers, to become great people in their own way. And Indians can also become great in their own way. So for that purpose, we have to give them our culture. Only then they can actually stand on their own legs, thinks these British intellectuals. And finally, progress. It means that every culture, every civilization has the ability to progress, and Indians also have the ability to progress. So for them to progress, we have to give them our culture. So this is the mentality of the British. And with this mentality, you should know there are three groups of British thinkers present. The first group is the conservative group. The second group is the paternalistic imperialist group. Third group is the radical progressive group. So we will look at these three groups of people one by one. These British thinkers are going to justify colonialism. They are going to justify the British socio-cultural policy in India. Now the conservatives, they are a different group of people. Conservatives, as the name says, they are conservative. They actually don't want to change the Indian culture. They say the Indian culture is different, our culture is different. Indian culture is not necessarily inferior to our culture, and therefore we should not change it, we don't really understand it properly, we should keep away from this, says the conservative thinkers of Britain. Now these conservative thinkers are telling this, but the other group, paternalistic imperialists, they say no, we are the most civilized people and the Indians are not so civilized, they are not so cultured, we are better cultured, so we should look at the Indian people like our children. We are their parents, and as parents we know what is good for them and what is not good for them, and therefore we will decide what they should follow, what culture they should follow, and therefore we have to go for socio-cultural change in India, says this group of people. And finally you have this radicals, radical progressive. Radical progressives, they also say yes, Indian culture by itself is very stagnant, we have to get rid of it, we have to institute Western thought so that Indians also progress in all these many different ways, like the way how we have progressed. So radical people also told that we have to institute the Western school of thought, the British school of thought and the British taste in all of India. These three schools are holding different perspectives about what they wanted to do with regards to Indian culture, but you should know they all had one thing in common, which is that all three of them agreed that we should not leave India, we should stay in India only. All three of us decided we should deal with Indians in different ways, but we have to stay in India, we should not leave India at any cost. So this is how the British socio-cultural policy towards India was tilted. And as an instrument for propagating their socio-cultural ideas into India comes the Christian missionaries, as I told earlier. Now these Christian missionaries, what did they do? They came to India and they started justifying that Christianity is the superior religion than Hinduism or Islam. Now Christians have been living in India cordially with every other community in the country. So are every community, Islam and Hindus, Parsis, Sikhs, everybody. But these politically motivated missionaries brought in by the British, they started to create a lot of trouble. And they went around abusing the local culture. They started attacking Islam. They started attacking the Hindu faith and Hindu tradition, Islamic faith and Islamic tradition, which was not liked by the Indians one bit. Indians did not like that at all. They wanted to defend their own culture. Muslim people wanted to defend Islam, Hindus wanted to defend Hinduism, but the problem is the government always supported with the Christian missionaries only. One such example is the way how sati was abolished. The government told that as a humanitarian measure we are abolishing sati, but the Hindus felt that the abolition of sati is an interference by the foreigners in our culture. So Hindus do not like it. The British also prohibited female infanticide, which Indians are not happy with that, because Indians believe that whatever we do with regards to our culture and our families and our homes, you should not come and interfere here, says the Hindus. The British also legalized widow remarriage in Hindu faith, which is once again not liked by the Indians, not liked by the Hindus. So Hindus do not like that, and they felt that this is also once again intrusion into our tradition and culture. So in hindsight today, we can appreciate the abolition of sati, we can appreciate the abolition of female infanticide and also the legalization of widow remarriage. Yes, today we can appreciate it, but back then the Indian society, the Hindu society specifically, was not happy with this at all. Hindu society was very much against it, and it developed a lot of hatred against the British. That is the socio-cultural policy. Now come to education. With regards to education, you should know the British created a huge amount of chaos in India. See, the British told that we want to simply take money from India and enrich Britain. That's all we want. This is what they told initially. They realized that they don't even understand the Indian way of life. They don't understand the Indian education. They don't understand the Indian culture. But they said that what we will do is we will actually go around and we will educate Indians, we will try to streamline the Indian schools of thought for the Indians, they decided. So it is in this idea only, you notice that many company officials started Indian schools for Indians. For example, Warren Hastings, he established Calcutta Madrasa. Jonathan Duncan, he established the Sanskrit College. So they wanted to streamline Indian education itself. So this is what they did initially. But then with more and more time, as time passed, what happened was, many of these people who were present in India, officials present in India, they decided that we want to sell British goods to Indians. So Indians should think of the British education as the best education. They should think in British ways. They should have a British taste in everything. So we have to bring in English based modern education into India, comes the people. And they say that this modern education has to be instituted in India, and there are three different ways in which it comes into play. First, the British government itself says that we will institute this modern education into India, they say. Second, there are many Christian missionaries who say that we will actually help in building a lot of schools in India and enroll Indian students into modern education, where in which they will get modern education, they will also be exposed to Christianity. Then third, many Indian intellectuals, many Indian reformers who believed that Indian education was lacking in content, they also wanted the foreign education, the Western education in India. So they also supported the Western education thought here. So here you look at the missionaries first. The missionaries decided that we wanted to institute Indian education into India because Indian educational setup is not all that conducive, it is not forward, it is lacking a lot of aspects of education. So we will create lots of schools. So they went around and they established many schools in India, schools, colleges, many of them are established here, and they enrolled a lot of students. Many social reformers like people like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Bal Shastri Jambekar, these people also supported modern Western education in India. These people decided that we will support Western education into India, modern education into India, both meaning the same. We will support that because we believe that Indians should have exposure to all the Western thoughts, as Indian way of learning is very, very rigid, very narrow, and there is no amount of, there is not a lot of rational thought taught in the Indian way of education. Therefore, they supported this Western education for the upliftment of Indians only. That's why they supported. They were not behaving in an anti-Indian manner. No, they supported because it was useful for Indians. They truly believed. And then of course, you have the British themselves, government themselves, instituting the education system here. The British Governor Generals, they decided that we will allocate some amount of money for education of India. How much money? The Charter Act of 1813 says that we will allocate 1 lakh rupees for education in India. We will allocate this money. So how will this allocation go into play is the question. The thing is, many people were thinking 1 lakh rupees we have. With this 1 lakh rupees, should we go ahead and continue to encourage Indian way of education, or should we encourage Western way of education is the question. Should there be Orientalist education, meaning Indian way of education, or Western way of education is the question. Eventually they decided that no, it is not going to be the Orientalist way, it is going to be the Western way only. Next question. Fine, are we going to give Western education in Indian languages or English language? Again, debate is going on. Once again they decided, no, we will give it only in English language, not in Indian language. So here is where I want to talk about this person called as Lord Macaulay. So Lord Macaulay is a British official, a British intellectual, who truly believed that the Orientalist school of thought, the Indian way of education, traditional education, is very backward and is stagnant. It should be thrown away. And all the Indian languages is the place from which this education came place. This traditional education came into play, and therefore all the Indian languages should also be thrown away. Everywhere they should be speaking English only. They should not speak their mother tongue. There is no good they will have by speaking their mother tongue. Therefore, we will introduce the Western education based on English as a medium of instruction only, says the person, this person called as Lord Macaulay. And he says that I will introduce a system of education because we have very little amount of money. With that money, it is difficult for us to actually educate all Indians. So what will we do? We will educate, let's say for example, 10 Indians. We will educate 10 Indians. Just 10 Indians with whatever money that we have. We have very little money. We'll have, let's say, 1 lakh rupees. With that 1 lakh rupees, we'll allocate 10,000 rupees for 10 people, and with that 10,000 rupees, we'll be able to educate them fully through school, and till the end of school, we'll be able to educate them completely. So we will educate all these 10 people, and then these 10 people will go forward and they will each educate 10 more people each. So that means 10 people will end up educating 100 people in total. Those 100 will educate 1,000 and 1,000 will educate 10,000. So in this way, we will be able to educate all of India with a small amount of money, says Lord Macaulay. This theory is called as downward filtration theory. This theory, however, completely failed. Why? Because all those 10 Indians who got educated initially, all those 10 Indians, they didn't go around educating other people. They went around and they started to look for other jobs and went into other jobs. So none of them really educated another Indian. So this downward filtration theory was a huge disaster that also failed. But you should know, there is also one question. First of all, what are the specific reasons why the British wanted to educate Indians? We have seen all these different debates that is going on with the British, that is correct. But why specifically did they want to educate Indians is the question. The answer is multifold. First of all, the British, as I told earlier, wanted to change the Indian taste towards the British. They wanted to change the Indian taste, therefore they will purchase more British goods. So commercial interest is there. Number two, there is also this scope of these educated Indians, Western educated Indians, serving the British in the British administration. It becomes possible now. So the British will educate Indians to such an extent where they can be used as their subordinates, as for doing some menial clerical job, which will help them in their administration. So now it is for administrative interest also. First it is commercial interest, now it is administrative interest. Third is political interest. If Indians get Western education a lot, they will start understanding the British more, they will start accepting the British rule more and more. If they start to accept British rule more and more, it means that it becomes easier for the British to rule over India. So this is why the British wanted to institute education. Now having said all of this about education, was there any weakness in this education system? Absolutely yes. There was a terrible sets of weaknesses present in this education system created by the British. Now first of all, when Western education was instituted, traditional education was eroded away and it was completely erased. Even today, how many people in India, how many students in India are getting traditional education? Nobody is. So traditional education system is getting eroded away. Then you also have this problem of focus on English much more. When English is focused to a great extent, what it means is all the vernacular languages in India is not being spoken. Indians started to think that only if I speak English, I will be looked at as an elite person. So they started to speak other languages in a their own mother tongue, they started to think about their own mother tongue in a very inferior manner. So they think that I have to speak English, I should not speak my mother tongue, and if I speak my mother tongue, everybody will frown at me. So I want to sound elite, that's why I speak English. That's why they started developing this attitude. So which is also going to change the Indian mentality forever. Then many of this education system that the British created, it was focusing on higher education but very little focus on the lower levels of education. Meaning there is not a lot of schools built, but there are many colleges built. So what is the logic here? We don't really understand. Without schools, how many people will go to colleges? So that problem is also there. Mass education was not encouraged by the British. If many Indians are getting educated, then these Indians will start to learn a lot of things by themselves, and later they will start to ask a lot of questions to the British. So mass education was not in the interest of the British. They did not encourage that at all. Education of science and technology was also not given to the Indians. Why? If Indians learn science and technology, they will start developing their own industries, which will be contradicting, which will be in conflict with the British industries, British industrial policy. So that's also not accepted by the British. And finally, there was no importance given to women's education. Women's education was completely discarded by the British. Why? Because first of all, the British need to only convince the men of India, because India was a very, very patriarchal society. So when they say we want to change the taste of Indians, they are talking about the Indian men, because men are the ones who purchase things from the market, not the women. Then also, when they say we want to make the Indians more amenable to the British rule, they are talking about the men only, because men are the ones who need to be convinced, because women really don't have any political say in the family or out in the streets. And also, they wanted the Indian men to come out and work in the government offices as clerks, because they know that Indian women will not come out of their home. Indian women will not come out of their home, and Indian men will not allow women to come out of their home. Therefore, in that way, the women folk is not going to work in the government offices, and therefore, because of all these reasons, why should we even focus on women's education? It is not at all needed. We should not work on women's education. If women want to get educated, let them do it at their own expense. I will not really focus specifically to empower the women folk in India, the girl children in India. That is not really in the interest of the British. It doesn't serve any of our purposes, any of our interests. Therefore, I will not focus. Besides the British, who were the ones who built schools for women in India, girl children in India? It was Indian reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, the most important, and other people like Pandita Ramabai, Dhondo Kesaf Karve, and all these people. They were the ones who worked for the women's education. They were the ones who worked for women's empowerment, not the British. So these are all the weaknesses of the modern education system of the British. Having said all of this, we have come to the end of the class, where we have looked at the political policies, the economic policies, the land revenue policy, the administrative policy, socio-cultural policy, and also the education policy of the British. All these things which I have taught are very important in terms of your UPSC exam, especially in terms of the mains exam for UPSC. So we have looked at all these policies conducted by the British, and we have seen how Indians are getting exploited because of all these policies which I discussed. So once Indians are going to get exploited so much, Indians are not going to stay silent. They are going to retaliate back. And how are they going to retaliate back? They are going to retaliate back in the form of revolts and rebellions. So many revolts and rebellions are going to happen, and as a result of these revolts and rebellions, there is going to be so much of trouble with the British here. And what are those revolts and rebellions? What are the troubles faced by the British? We will see in the next video. So, thank you.